Picture this. No warning, no goodbye. A 9-year-old boy named Temujin is standing in the dark, just watching the dust settle as his entire camp rides away. Weeks earlier, his father, a minor tribal chief, was poisoned during a meal by a rival tribe. And now, the very people who were supposed to protect Temujin's family are abandoning them in the dead of night. Why would they do that? Well, because in this ancient world, a dead leader's family was considered absolutely worthless. And worthless things, they just get left behind.
To really grasp what this meant, this was essentially a virtual death sentence. You have to understand exactly where they were left. The steppe. It's a harsh, vast, mostly treeless plain in Mongolia. Imagine your entire modern social safety net just vanishing overnight. Poof. Survival out here depends entirely on your livestock, your horses, and the strength of your tribe. Without those, you've got nothing. The brutal political calculation of the tribe was pretty simple, honestly. A widow and her young children offered zero military or political value. Sticking around meant risking your own life for people who could give you absolutely nothing in return.
So they were quite literally left to starve. Try to imagine being abandoned in one of the harshest environments on Earth. You have no herd to reliably provide milk or meat, and zero men to defend you if raiders happen to come through. Temujin, his mother Hulun, and his siblings were reduced to literally digging in the dirt for roots and catching whatever tiny game they could scrape together. There was absolutely no guarantee they'd survive the winter, let alone the decade.
Now, I really want you to pause and think about this for a second. What happens to a person when starvation is literally the only alternative? What kind of horrifying choices are demanded of you when you're completely isolated and that desperate? Most retellings of Genghis Khan's life kind of skip this next part entirely. They just assume his family slowly rebuilt through hard work or something. But what actually happened? It's genuinely disturbing. During these brutal years of extreme poverty, Temujin killed his own older half-brother, Begter. And historical accounts don't describe this as some simple, tragic accident or standard sibling rivalry. No, it was a terrifyingly cold, calculated act over a dispute for food and resources within their own starving family. The survival situation was so incredibly dire that even family loyalty had its absolute limits. The man who would go on to unite a continent first survived a childhood where murdering his own brother seemed like a necessary, logical choice.
But, as you might guess, his hardship didn't stop there. As a young man, Temujin faced his next major trauma. He was hunted down and captured by a rival clan, and to make absolutely sure he couldn't run, they locked him in a kangi, a heavy restrictive wooden collar secured tightly around his neck and wrists. It made even basic movement agonizing. Just pure physical torture that escalated the suffocating feeling of total helplessness. But, according to traditional accounts, he actually manages to escape under the cover of darkness.
The legend goes that he hid in a freezing river, submerged, completely still, breathing through a hollow log while armed men searched the riverbank just feet away. This thrilling, almost cinematic detail comes from a text called The Secret History of the Mongols, which was written by Mongol scribes after his death. Now, as historians note, while the broader strokes of his poverty, his captivity, and his escape are totally accurate, some of these highly dramatic details, well, they might have been a bit embellished. It's kind of how founding origin stories often get polished up once a leader becomes incredibly powerful.
But what isn't disputed is the revolutionary socio-political shift Temujin initiated specifically because of these traumas. For generations, the old steppe rules dictated that power was determined entirely by your bloodline and birth rank. If you were born poor, you stayed poor, period, no matter how talented you were. Temujin essentially invented a ruthless modern corporate ladder. Having been completely abandoned by his own people, he created a brand new system. Power and promotion would be based purely on demonstrated skill and proven loyalty. It didn't matter what family you were born into.
Skill over bloodline. It seems super obvious to us today, but back then, it was totally unprecedented. And word travels fast among people who've spent their entire lives being told their birth determined their ceiling. Because of this massive meritocratic shift, skilled warriors and entire smaller clans actually began defecting from their aristocratic leaders. They genuinely wanted to join Temujin. They wanted a leader who would actually recognize and reward their sheer abilities.
So, how long did this all actually take? Well, we start in roughly 1171, with a starving boy abandoned on the steppe. Through his alliances, including early bonds with friends like Jamuka and this revolutionary system of rewarding loyalty, he spends the late 1100s systematically defeating or absorbing nearly every other major rival tribe. Decades of grueling warfare finally culminate in the year 1206.
In 1206, he achieved something Mongolia had literally never seen before.
He united all the warring tribes at a great assembly known as a Kurultai. It was surprisingly somewhat like an early democratic voting council among elites. Just picture him at this exact moment. He is surrounded by kneeling men who, a generation earlier, would never have followed a starving widow's son. Some of them had even hunted him. And now they're naming him Genghis Khan, which translates roughly to universal ruler.
But uniting Mongolia was really just the beginning. Turning outward, Genghis Khan and his successors rapidly conquered an almost incomprehensible amount of territory. At its height, the empire controlled roughly 1/5 of the entire inhabited world. 1/5. The boy who was left with absolutely nothing went on to build the largest contiguous land empire in human history. To put that into perspective, the Mongol Empire stretched far, far beyond Alexander the Great's conquests, and it absolutely dwarfs the Roman Empire at its peak. We are talking about a massive, unbroken stretch of connected territory going all the way from the Sea of Japan in the east to parts of Eastern Europe in the west. It's just staggering.
So how was this even possible? Well, often, the Mongol armies were significantly smaller than the forces they defeated. Their success wasn't just about overwhelming numbers or better tactics. Genghis Khan wasn't training soldiers from scratch. He was leading an entire population of people who had survived the exact same brutal steppe that almost killed him. Every single rider had spent their life trekking across open terrain, living on horseback, and reading the land for danger and opportunity. Genghis Khan simply gave them a single shared direction to point all those hard-won survival skills toward.
However, it's absolutely vital to report exactly what those survival skills unleashed. Building this massive empire did not happen peacefully. The conquest resulted in millions of deaths across Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. Warfare, the deliberate destruction of resisting cities, and the subsequent famines and diseases caused one of the largest population declines of that era. Both realities exist at once here. The meritocratic system that lifted up the poor also ruthlessly devastated entire civilizations that stood in its path.
And this brings us to the end of his life in 1227. Genghis Khan dies on campaign, and honestly, historians still debate whether it was a fall from a horse, illness, or an old wound. But following deep cultural practice, the Mongols made absolutely sure his resting place would never, ever be found. The funeral procession reportedly killed anyone they encountered just to keep the route a secret. The soldiers who buried him were executed by other soldiers who were then killed themselves. It's an incredibly violent chain of executions, but you kind of have to admit, as a security measure, it worked perfectly.
Despite extensive searches using modern satellite technology, his tomb has never been found. So where did he go? The man who controlled more of the earth than anyone before or since simply vanished back into the very same unmarked dirt that once abandoned him. He started with absolutely nothing. No resources, no protection, no luck. So I want to leave you with this to think about. How much of world history was permanently altered simply because a desperate 9-year-old boy refused to starve in the dark?